Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being here tonight. I'm Stephanie Boudelier, a faculty member in the School of Education, and I welcome you to the 25th season of the Contemporary Writers Series. We are thankful to celebrate our 25th season in person. A few notes to share before we move on. We'd like to acknowledge that we sit on the Ottawa and Peoria land, and I encourage you to learn more at native-land.ca. We want to thank our author guest, Matt Mendez, for his service in the Air Force, and thank all other veterans who are here with us tonight. We thank you for wearing your masks properly throughout the evening by covering your whole face, including your nose. Mr. Mendez will follow his reading with time for you to ask questions. So please be ready to ask questions if you are willing up at the microphones. And finally, you are invited to stay after the reading to talk with others, grab a cup of coffee and a cookie, and get your book signed. Thank you all for being here tonight. I now invite Yadira de Leon Lopez, a senior in our health sciences major, to give her introduction. Can everyone hear me? Okay, sounds good. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Yadira de Leon Lopez, and tonight I have the pleasure of introducing our second writer for 2021-2022 season, Matt Mendez. He has authored a collection of short stories called Fishing Hearts and the novel Barely Missing Everything, which was named Best YA Book by Kirkus, 17 Magazine, NBC Latino, and Texas Monthly in 2019. The novel has received praise from esteemed authors within the Latinx writing community, such as Sandra Sinceros, American Book Award winner and author of The House on Main Street. The overwhelming positive response this novel has had on readers speaks to the authenticity of the story told within its pages. Originally from El Paso, Texas, Mendez moved to Tucson, Arizona after serving in the Air Force for 4 years. After attending Pima Community College, he studied at the University of Arizona and graduated with a BA in Media Arts and an MFA in Creative Writing. Mendez is also involved in other impactful initiatives within his community. He has been a speaker for the Adelante program at Pima Community College, a program designed to help Chicanos earn college degrees, and has facilitated creative writing workshops with Tucson youth. Through his active participation, he fills in the representation gaps for Latinx youth in a thoughtful and meaningful way. From just reading the first few pages of the book, I knew an untold but familiar story will be soon developed in an authentic manner. In the interview with Inscape Journal, Mendez describes the limited representation of brown characters throughout literature, especially in books taught in schools. He states, they're an underserved group because nobody thinks of little brown boys reading books. They're not going to be the target audience. And with Barely Missing Everything, Mendez attempts to change this narrative and diminish the disconnect he felt while reading its book. This reality is an explanation for my sincere connection with the characters in the novel. It wasn't until my junior year of college I finally identified with a piece of literature which was Barely Missing Everything. It was assigned during my EH265 class with Nanowrimo, a class where students become consultants for the Writing Center, and because Mendez is a Hispanic published author, this representation reminded me that I was not out of place and reaffirmed my desire to be a consultant and view myself as a writer. Barely Missing Everything is not your typical coming-of-age story. It is not focused on making readers feel good, but instead it's about telling the truth and being authentic. Mendez' attention to detail offers readers a genuine perspective of life for Latinx youth in America, and more specifically, the interactions between systemic racism and police brutality. This coincides with how the initial name of Barely Missing Everything was developed. Same interview with Inscape Journal, Mendez explains how he came across a death row inmate on the Texas Department of Justice website. The inmate was not only Mexican, but also shared the exact same birthday with Mendez. After reading the inmate's file, it was apparent that they were both born in Texas and from poor towns. Because of this, a clear theme within Barely Missing Everything
is that outcomes are more dependent on circumstances rather than individual choices. This becomes heartbreakingly evident when two protagonists find themselves at a party that is spontaneously raided by police. The cop drawing on him suddenly holstered his weapon and yelled into the radio fastened to his shoulder, his attention drawn to something behind Juan turned. It was GD, perched on the back wall of the yard. Come on, Juan, let's go, GD yelled, then jumped. Dude, what? Juan glanced at the cop, who was now eyeing him. Try it, his eyes seemed to be blinking. The way Juan and GD's all too familiar experiences are shared within the novel encourages reflection and confronts any stereotypes of misbehaving Latinx youth by providing context. In these types of situations, the story is typically popularized by those in power, and by telling it from the perspective of the underrepresented, Mendez allows for the readers to understand what's really happening. On behalf of the Contemporary Writers Series Committee, I'm honored to introduce Matt Mendez. We're so grateful for you to be joining us this evening, and on that note, I'll give the floor over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. That was so great. Can everybody hear me? I'm usually way taller with this microphone, so sometimes I'll be talking for a while and nobody can hear me. All right. So thank you everyone for being here. This is my first live event since 2019, so I'm super excited to be in person, be around people, which is fantastic. I'd like to thank Gretchen for inviting me to the school. I'd like to thank Stephanie and Shelly for being such great hosts. Danny Gretchen for inviting me to their class today where I got to do a writing workshop and be silly and talk about stealing story ideas from headlines and newspapers and online articles. So thank you for your indulgence and for your time tonight. As Stephanie said earlier, it's Veterans Day today. And normally, like I said, I was in the Air Force for 4 years. I'm in the Air National Guard where I'm full-time and have been for all my adult life now. And usually Veterans Day is a day that I kind of celebrate quietly. It's, you know, me, my family, or some friends that kind of get together and kind of, take the day in, but it's normally a quiet event. But after today, getting me to workshop, going to nice restaurants for lunch and dinner, now getting a chance to talk to you, I'm not quite sure I could celebrate the same way now. I'm probably gonna have to do this every year. So maybe next year I'll get a chance to go talk to other students, which would be great. So like I said earlier, I've been in the military for 26 years, which is a super long time, all my adult life. And lucky for me as a writer, it only takes me half as long to write a novel, which is, I'm exaggerating, but only by a little bit. So this month is Nanowrimo. Does everybody know what Nanowrimo is? It's wherever all your friends online pretend they're gonna write a novel in 1 month. And then come December 1, you never hear about it again. So for me, first, that idea just sounds super torturous, the idea of trying to write a whole novel in a month. I would rather, I'd rather reactivate my Facebook account and try to convince people I went to high school with to get the vaccine than try to write a novel in a month, because both to me seem very impossible to do. In my career, I will probably never be a prolific writer. That's because I'm a slow writer. I love to take my time with the work, and I love to examine. I know when I get the idea for a novel, we talked a little bit about this in dance class, there has to be a spark of curiosity that pops in. There has to be a reason that I want to pursue this. And when I know in my heart, when I'm going to do this, that it's going to take tons of research. I'm going to spend a lot of time research. I'm going to spend a lot of time developing character and thinking about plot and story. There's going to be hours of my butt parked in front of my laptop staring at a blank screen. There's going to be even more time cleaning my house and ignoring all the things I just told you I was going to do. And the time it took me to write Barely Messing Everything, my now ex-wife created 2 perfect human beings. I remember writing, taking a break, her telling me that there was a baby growing inside of her, and then me blinking, and then it was outside of her body. She was holding it. And this happened twice. Now, I said ex-wife, so I don't want anybody here thinking that being a writer or a novelist is somehow contrary to having a good relationship or a marriage. I would never say it was an issue in our marriage, but she probably would. She definitely would. This is a lively crowd. All right. So, as Yelena said, the idea for Barely Missing Everything came when I was at a writers' conference in Vermont. I was in Vermont in the summer, so it was beautiful. It was lush and green. I remember sitting on the field of grass. It was soft. I was watching the trees kind of sway. And that's really when inspiration hit me, in the form of an email that I got on my phone, because instead of paying attention to nature, I was really just looking at my phone and scrolling like everybody else is always doing. And the email was from a fiction editor at a publication that was publishing one of my short stories. And that short story was about a young girl whose brother was on death row, and he was about to be executed. Now, this young girl had never met her brother. He was on death row before she was born. And for people who are on death row, the average, at least in Texas, is between 10 to 18 years from being put on death row until that inmate's eventually executed. So correspondence, writing letters, was how this young girl developed a relationship with her brother. And as this relationship grew, she got used to hearing his words and kind of thinking about what they meant. And then she started to think about what his last words were going to be. So the fiction editor wanted to check a fact that's in the story, which is that the state of Texas has this kind of absurd, tragic website where they chronicle every last statement for people who have been executed in Texas. And it goes all the way back to the 70s. And if you ever go and read that website, it'll have it kind of reads like poetry that's also tragic and absurd. So I went to this website, I got the link, and I sent it to the fiction editor. And like Yelena was saying, when I did, I noticed that there was some other information on there. So every person who's on death row, all their criminal records on there, and also personal information, where they're from, who they are, their level of education. All this is just there to be seen. And while I was on the site, I saw a man on there who had my exact birthday, day, and year. And like me, he's from Texas. He's from a border town, from a poor border town. And he was Mexican-American, just like me. So of course, the idea of how did I end up at this kind of wonderful writing conference, experiencing these wonderful things, how did I end up here? And how did somebody who grew up in my almost identical circumstances end up on death row? And that was really the starting point for the novel. I'm gonna drop water all over myself now. Chapter 1. I love puns, as people found out earlier today. Juan Ramos was dead. His game, stiff and clumsy from the jump. It was January. The season already beyond the halfway point, and every game had been part of a parade of embarrassments. The air inside the gym hung thick and sour, the ventilation system crapping out before tip-off and making each breath like swallowing a hard-boiled egg. Juan stood at the edge of the huddle as Coach Paul ripped the team for not playing smarter. The Austin Panthers point guard stood doubled over and tried to catch his breath. He had plunged the team into a hole after only 5 minutes, turning the ball over twice and going 0 for 5 from the field. Ramos, take a seat, Coach Paul yelled, mean-mugging him from the middle of the huddle. You're showing no heart out there. Whatever, Juan said as he took his seat on the bench. Heart was never going to matter. The game had swirled down the toilet the moment Juan's mother, Fabi, and her boyfriend, Ruben, strolled inside the gym during layup drills. The clicking of Fabi's high heels echoing across the Panther Athletic Center, the pack, and inside Juan's head, causing his attention to pinball from defensive assignments and running the offense to wondering why his mom had showed to the game in the first place, a thing she never did. Dressed in a pair of tight jeans and a too small Austin Panthers t-shirt, her wrists spangled with bracelets, his mother pointed to a pair of empty seats behind the Panther bench, her fingernails long and glossy red. Like she wanted, Fabi had the attention of every man in the pack. And once seated, the mesmerized men went from watching her to sizing up Ruben, collectively wondering how a goofy motherfucker like him had landed a woman like Fabi. He was shorter than Fabi by more than a few inches and wore a cowboy hat that dwarfed his head. His blue jeans had creases ironed down the middle of the legs, and he wore his Austin Panthers t-shirt over a long-sleeved button-down shirt. Of course, Juan didn't have to wonder. Ruben only seemed like a sucker. He was the owner of Easy Motors, a used car lot that made a killing selling shitty rides to Fort Bliss soldiers and people with even shittier credit. He was a predator, and unfortunately for Fabi, easy prey was written all over her. The Panthers were also easy kills. All they had going for them was Juan, the best player on the worst team in 4A Region 1, District 1. And with him playing like a scrub, they had no chance of winning. It was Juan's senior year, but it had begun without letters from college recruiters, even though he'd been all district the past 2 seasons, leaving him to wonder just what exactly he was going to do after graduation, if he made it that far. His grades were garbage, and Mr. Rosales, his guidance counselor, had told him before the start of the semester he'd be better off learning a trade than worrying about basketball for college. With Juan on the bench, Derek Evans started up and down the court, the EPHS Tigers point guard extending the lead in 2 quick possessions. The score, 20-0. Juan had made the mistake of playing too aggressively against Evans. On defense, he reached for steals, slapping Evans across the arms and earning a cheap foul. On offense, Juan tried too much isolation, ignoring wide open teammates and taking terrible shots. Evans was a senior too, a guard with speed and court vision that had recruiters taking notice. Coach Paul told Juan before the game that Evans was peaking at just the right time. That timing was absolutely everything. Timing and not being a 5'8" Mexican. All right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. As the game goes on, Juan gets called in, he goes in, and then immediately pukes all over the courts. Then the teams go in for halftime, they come back out. Juan is dressed but has no intention of playing, and he's sitting on the sideline watching his mom. Watching Mom look like a forever teen over there, Juan began to wonder how life had been for her in high school. Fabi had also gone to Austin, at least until she became pregnant with him her sophomore year and dropped out. He imagined she'd been popular, but he didn't know that for sure. She didn't have any best friends, at least none that he knew of. She was smart, getting her GED without taking any study classes, but maybe not that smart, seeing as she still worked at the same bar that had been her first job at 17. He'd always assumed his father had gone to school with her. He wished Fabi had been the type to keep yearbooks. She didn't hang photographs on the walls of the apartment or keep albums or have pictures on her phone, aside from this cascade of selfies taken in front of a bathroom mirror. So many times Juan wanted to hold a yearbook in his hands, thumb through the glossy pages, and maybe come upon a familiar face, his own. Whenever he brought up his father, though, Fabi would turn squirmy. When he'd been little, she'd tell him he didn't need a dad, that it was them versus the world. He used to love this idea. But as he grew older and learned their world often included random boyfriends, he began wondering who his old man could be, why these other dudes were in his life, but not his father. But Fabi always dodged his questions with shifty answers. It's really complicated, Mijo. I'll tell you when you're older, when you'll understand. Juan didn't get why she would hide this from him. Knowing a name wouldn't change the fact that he wasn't around. Still, he never pressed too hard, seeing how panicked she became whenever he asked, always changing the subject and raising her voice, and spoke real fast, going from English to Spanish. He rarely asked her now at all. So before I even wrote a word of Barely Missing Everything, I did what I said I was going to do, which is research. And the first thing I knew I had to do was reach out to John, who was the guy in Texas who had my birthday. So I just cold wrote him a letter. and I wrote down all the questions that I wanted to know from John. Now, I didn't want to know anything about his crime or what he convicted of or what he had done prior, right before becoming on death row. I wanted to know about Juan and his childhood. And the responses I got after a few exchanges with him were really insightful. At first, I thought I was going to discover some socioeconomic reason why John was in jail and I wasn't. But there'd be this kind of line of if you're just this poor, you go to prison, but if you have a little bit more money, then eventually you get to steal yourself away to college. And what I found is that's not exactly true. Sure, those barriers exist, and social and economic forces do force people to make hard choices and affect their lives in very demonstrative ways. But in my letters with John, I realized that there was also interpersonal risks that come with living in poverty. So John's mom was actually an RN, and they made decent money, although not outrageous money. But like Juan in the story, John had no idea who his father was. And his mom eventually married a man who became his stepfather. And while the man wasn't abusive, he was mean and would, wanted to take the father role, which John resented. So John, growing up, felt abandoned and alone. And feeling abandoned and alone, John looked for acceptance in all the wrong places, which were the gangs in his neighborhood. In those letters he would write to me, he would often say that he wished he had listened to his mother more, and even to his stepfather, because now, looking back at it, he understood what they were trying to do, even if they were inarticulate in how they did it. Which got me thinking about Fabi in the story and the mother character, and I just knew that making her a point of view character was absolutely essential. So I was writing a coming of age story and thinking about Fabi and adulthood, I began to realize that no matter what age we are, we're always coming of age. We're always entering a facet of our lives where it's unknown and we're unprepared for that unknown. And that's just a constant thing for us growing up as we grow and evolve as people. So to me, putting Fabi in the story as a point of view character just seemed really natural. I'm going to read a little bit from Fabi's point of view. Fabi sat on the toilet and peed, holding the thin plastic stick between her legs. After freaking out all weekend about Juan, she had wondered how bad the week was going to be, and now Monday morning was starting off this way. This was her third pregnancy test in 3 hours. The first showed positive, a blue plus sign in the test window. The second was unclear, a pair of parallel lines meant to signify positive or negative, but instead looking like a blob of pink. Her period was a month late, and she'd been off birth control for way longer than that. She hadn't been with anyone in forever, and getting pregnant wasn't something she really worried about, not even after meeting Ruben. When she finished, she placed the stick on the toilet tank, next to a dusty basket of potpourri. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed and flickered, like it always did. The flooring needed to be redone, mildew seeming to have replaced the grout between the cracked and mismatched tiles. The faucet dripped nonstop. Complaining to the landlady, a woman named Flor Ramirez, would be a waste of time. Flor still hadn't fixed a window in her bedroom that had slipped from its frame, or looked into the leak stain forming on the ceiling above her head. It had started small, just a swirl, but grew into a flared brown hurricane. Fabi washed her hands and sat back on the toilet, waiting for the digital test, which was stupid expensive, to spell things out for her. If positive, the word pregnant would appear across the viewfinder. Meanwhile, Ruben and Juan sat in the living room, awkwardly watching TV together. Of course, Juanito hated Ruben. He hated all her boyfriends. Fabi always thought Juan was just being territorial, but now she wasn't so sure. After watching his power struggle with his coach the other night, it was possible he thought all men, except for his grandpa, were sketchy. Maybe he hated all of them. Still, Ruben was oddly patient, putting up with him. It had been his idea to watch Juanito's basketball game. And then he'd been okay with Juanito skipping out of them afterwards, telling her not to worry about it, like he got ditched all the time. Then this morning, Fabi had to pick Juanito up at county jail. His bond had been $1,000, but a bond company, Get Free, Took 300 to get him out. There's nothing free about that. There had been plenty of times when Fabi felt like a shit mom. But picking him up from jail and him not even looking happy to see her when he got released, that was the shittiest. Her life was some kind of ghetto sitcom. She picked at the pregnancy test. The little white stick read pregnant, and Fabi felt like her bones had been replaced by steel rods. She couldn't move from the toilet seat, so she cupped her hands around her face and cried. She'd been in her father's bathroom when she'd learned about Juanito almost 18 years earlier, reading a similar stick covered in pee. She remembered how the room smelled like his aftershave, like aqua velva, or was it brute? Her mother had just died, her sister about to disappear to college. At least this time, she didn't puke all over the sink. After a minute, Fabi told herself, start over. She took another shower, and after brushing her teeth, she slipped on some fresh clothes, did her hair, and put on her face, before making her way back to the living room, still not quite ready to deal with either Juanito or Ruben. What took you so long? Juan asked, pointing at his left ankle as Fabi joined them and Ruben in the living room. I think this thing is broke. His ankle was purple and blue around the joint and the toes, tiger striping up the middle of his calf. Fabi moved to sit by her son on the couch. Ruben leaned forward on the mismatched chair facing them. Juan had been fine after the game, minus the upset stomach, and Fabi wondered just how he'd hurt himself so badly, whether the police had anything to do with it. She reached out to touch his ankle, but Juan pulled away, wincing as he did. Would you like a ride to the hospital? Ruben asked Fabi, ignoring Juan. It's no problem. No, Juan shut him down before Fabi could answer. Why don't you leave already? Don't you have deals to make? He slumped down in his seat, crossed his arms, looking every bit the angry teen. Come on, Juan, Fabi said. You're being rude to both of us. You two are at us now? I get it. Juan was trying to make her feel worse than the worst mother on the planet. And it was working. I don't want to bother you, Fabi said to Ruben, trying to ignore Juan. Ruben half stood, like he wanted to join them on the couch, but she motioned for him to sit his ass back down. It's no problem, Ruben persisted, readjusting in his seat. I think it's a problem, Juan said, but no one ever wants my opinion around here. Shut up already. Fabi felt like a rope in a game of tug of war. You weren't enough trouble, and Ruben, thank you for your offer, mi cariño. She immediately wished she hadn't called him that. Him smiling that same toothy smile he did at the end of one of his cheesy used car commercials. That smile. Would he smile that same way at the news of her being pregnant? Would he turn noble, talk about being there for her and the baby, and possibly even mean it? Would she find out Ruben had other baby mamas, a track record of knocking women up and then leaving, never to be heard from again? The simple possibility of that stunned her. And what stunned her even more was realizing she didn't know Ruben well enough to guess what he'd do. But all that would have to wait until after dealing with Juanito's ankle. I'll call you later tonight, okay? She said to Ruben. I've got my hands full. Okay, bueno pues, Ruben said, still smiling as he sprung up to leave. Juan exhaled loudly, in that way teenagers do when they don't have the words to express how stupid they find everything, and zeroed in on the television, suddenly interested in a cooking show where a woman was wrapping seemingly everything in bacon. Those shows are everywhere, by the way. Someone skip forward a little bit. So Fabi takes Juanito over to the urgent care, overpays for an air cast and ibuprofen, is obviously upset about it, and then is driving Juan back home after the doctor's appointment, where she decides that she's going to take him to her dad's house, to Grandpa's house, to watch him. Right when I start reading this, when she's pulling up right in front of his house. Her dad didn't move when he saw Fabi and Juan pull up. Fabi wondered if he'd heard about Juan's trip to county. News like arrests, unplanned babies, divorces, and deaths spread quickly, the Hollywood paparazzi not having shit on the Medicis in Central. Fabi killed the engine and remained seated as it coughed to a stop. She wasn't quite ready to make her way to the porch. Since he retired from the city 20 years earlier as an electrician, her dad made extra cash fixing cars or working on busted washing machines. Anything really, him the neighborhood, Mr. Fix-It. And when he was done working for the day, he spent his time relaxing in the backyard, patiently tinkering on an old Chrysler, one she was sure he would never finish. It had probably been there since she was Juan's age. He stood as she hopped from the truck at last, watching her, suspicious as always. "Hi, Daddy," Fabi said, taking a deep breath and then climbing the stairs to join him. "Is it okay if Juan stays here for a while?" Taking a sip from his beer, her father craned his neck in order to see Juan still sitting stonily inside the truck. "Is it okay with him, Fabiola? He looks like he's the one who minds." "He's fine," Bobby sighed. "He hurt his ankle, and I don't want to leave him alone at the house." "At your apartment?" "Yes, Dad, the apartment." Grandpa nodded, his usual know-it-all nod. "They gave Juan meds at the doctor, and I don't want him alone while he's on them." "You mean drugs? What did they give him? Acid? Mota?" "Pinches doctors. They're worse than narcos nowadays." "It's just ibuprofen for the swelling." "What kind of drugs are you on, mijo?" Grandpa yelled down to Juan. "Are you gonna flip out or something? Eat my face? Should I chain you in the yard?" Juan stared back. "He's not gonna flip out," Bobby said, not wanting to argue, at least not yet. "Can I leave him here, or is that gonna be too big a deal for you?" She could tell she was pissing him off. He was rubbing his face and then giving her the same look he used to give her as a teenager. Fixed scowl, squinty eyes. The lines around his eyes were deeper now, though the spots on his cheeks still the same dark. "So where did he hurt him?" "You ask him," Bobby said. "He'll tell you, and then maybe you can tell me exactly what the hell happened." "Are you working tonight?" Grandpa was standing close enough to Bobby to hug her, but hadn't. She hadn't moved in to hug him either. Every moment between them was like this, an almost something moment, almost a fight, almost a ceasefire, almost the apocalypse. "If it's gonna be a big deal, Dad, then forget it. I was thinking of what was best for Juan, your grandson." "I didn't say no. Don't be so grosera. And come give your jefe a hug, for God's sakes. You want favors all the time, but you won't ever ask nice." Why did he have to be such an ass? Abby motioned for Juan to join them. Juan, at last, hobbled from the truck and limped up the stairs. Grandpa saying to Juan, "I've got crutches somewhere in the yard for you." "Thanks, Dad," Bobby said. "I'll be back to get him tonight. I just have some things that need my attention." "Like going to work?" "That too," Bobby sighed. "Entonces tomorrow, I'll get him first thing in the morning." Bobby kissed Juan on the forehead and told him she'd drive him to school the very next day. No arguments. Then she headed straight for the truck. She drove off in the direction of Project Vida, the free clinic, deciding she had more time than money. She called Ruben, listened to his ringback song, some cheesy reggaeton she didn't recognize and that sounded terrible. Ruben didn't answer, his voicemail instructing her to leave a message and he'd call back. Bobby had dated men like Ruben before, flashy types, macho types. Ruben was nicer than the others, but Fabi knew being nice wasn't the same thing as being good. They were only related. Nice was like good's cousin, cool, but sometimes sketchy. Still, Fabi decided she would tell Ruben about being pregnant. She was not going to make that mistake again, but not until she knew exactly what she was going to do about it. She hung up without saying a word. So that's Fabi. And to me, her part in the story is probably my favorite character in the story, because like Juan and like JD, she's in this really delicate stage in her life. And as I started writing and continued writing in the novels and draft after draft, I could feel myself not quite accessing characters like Fabi and JD. They were always a little bit at a remove. And I could tell when I was writing that what was coming out on the page was entirely my fault. I think as a writer, we have to be curious. We have to investigate the themes that we're working on. We have to investigate the characters, be curious about their lives. But there's also an element of vulnerability that's required in order to really capture a character. And being vulnerable as a writer means writing about the things that you would rather just not ever say out loud. The things that have happened to you, your experiences, and your thoughts. Because these are things that often you want to keep to yourself or between you and your therapist, and not necessarily write in a novel that you're going to share with, a room full of strangers. But I think in order to make a novel that's exploring themes of racism and police brutality and poverty and the border, in order to have the things you're interested and curious about writing about, in order to access those things, you need characters that a reader can connect with, that they can feel that what they're going through is absolutely real and true. And those are the truest parts of fiction, is when those characters say something, do something that is absolutely true, that they're given a choice, and when they make that choice, you know that that's what that character is going to do because you know so much about them. And that is really the writer being brave enough for him or her to get into the story and write things that make them more comfortable. If you're writing a story and you feel absolutely naked and uncomfortable, you are absolutely on the right path. If you're writing something and you think this is clever, then perhaps you're a little bit further away. And if you write something and you read it back and it's a cliche, you're absolutely lying. So stop lying. So for me, writing JD was a character who was a lot like me when I was that age, who was facing a lot of the same things I was facing as a young person, was the key to unlocking his character, Juan's, and Fabi's, who were a little bit different from me. So writing him was intimate and was personal. And to me, getting to that third point of view was what really unlocked the story for me, and what I think unlocks the entire novel. So at this point of the novel, Juan has discovered his father's secret, which is he is having an affair. And it has now blown up his family. It's his senior year, his parents have split up. And at this point, Juan has gotten in a fist fight with his best friend, has been kicked off the basketball team, has wrecked his car, and is about to join the Air Force without giving it any thought. And the scene I'm going to read is a flashback scene where he discovers his father's secret. Every young person's favorite. Last Christmas Eve, they'd been sitting in the living room watching Christmas shows on television. Rudolph and Frosty. JD, sitting on the floor, had wanted to get the KinoFlex Pro 8mm he'd lifted from the weekly Anaya family yard sale. Open for Christmas, open for business, even on Christmas Eve. After looking the camera up and watching videos on YouTube, it seemed reasonable to think that a camera like this could be the place for JD to start making movies. It looked like an actual movie camera, just smaller. A black case, silver trim with a protruding lens, a sleek handle for handheld shots that could easily be removed for placement on a tripod. It didn't look like the other cameras JD had acquired over the years. Cameras made for taking birthday parties and high school graduations. After all, if the Russians made the KinoFlex, then it had to be serious. For what JD could tell from the little Russian cinema he'd seen and the parade of dashcam videos he'd seen online, they only seemed to be funny on accident. Ama had been tired from making tamales with his tias and getting ready for the next day at Manos, with the entire family gathered every year after Mass. She was falling asleep with her head on the old man's shoulder. Alma had been her boyfriend's, that's his sister, which had pissed the old man off. He complained about this being family time, that he always worked, and when he didn't, everyone should be home. Of course, this was bullshit. Whoever knew when the old man would be home? JD had wanted to shoot hoops with Juan, or maybe go to some party Danny was talking about. But with his old man grumping around, he knew better than to leave. Besides, he had the camera. The camera drive motor was manual, a wind-up, but it wouldn't rotate. With no rattling sounds, there was probably nothing broken, just a misaligned or jammed gear. There had to be an adjustment JD could make to get the camera running and start filming. Something easy. Unable to focus on Rudolph and his convenient deformity, JD asked his old man if he could borrow some tools. For what? Pops kept his eyes on TV, his arm around the ma. Tomasito was sitting by his feet. Unlike JD, the family was absorbed by Rudolph. Everyone liked their misfits, better on television. I want to take my camera apart, see what's wrong with it. What camera? I got it at a yard sale. You bought a broken camera at a yard sale? How much did you pay? JD had his old man's unwanted attention now. Pops leaned forward to look at it as Ma sat up. What did you do? She asked. The question was automatic, like a greeting. Good morning, buenos dias. You have the right to remain silent. I got a camera at a yard sale today, no big deal. He got ripped off is what he did, his old man said disgustedly. Whose yard sale was it? Was it the Anayas? I told you not to go there, pinches ladrones. It doesn't matter. Bullshit. If they sold you something that doesn't work, then they should give you your money back. He's right, mijo, Ama said. You shouldn't protect them. Ow, fight them, Tomasito said, jumping to his feet and striking a pseudo kung fu pose. Him kicking his leg into the air. Yeah! That's enough, Ama said, pulling Tomasito into her lap. Watch Rudolph. At least this one wouldn't let himself get ripped off. Letting out a long sigh, JD's father slumped back into the couch and rubbed his hand across his face, as if he just heard JD confess to trading the family cow for magic beans. I knew it wasn't broken. I think I can fix it. Bring me this camera, his father had said. The Anayas had wanted $20 for the camera, probably a good price, but he still needed gifts for Ama and Alma, for his old man and Tomasito too. He probably overpaid for the football he bought for Tomasito, the Virgen statue for Ama, and the sunglasses for Alma, the It's Beer 30 somewhere clock for his old man. So JD didn't feel at all guilty slipping the broken camera into the waistband of his pants and leaving with a gift for himself. It was Christmas, after all. Here, JD said, after grabbing the camera from his room. His father held it flat in the palm of his hand, as if his hand were a scale determining the camera's worth. How much did you pay? $1, JD said. His old man wouldn't care about $1, would he? Well, at least it wasn't more than that. I mean, even if you get this thing running, where are you going to get film, get it developed? This thing was ancient when I was a kid. Your tata used to have one. Nobody uses these, mijo. Even for $1, you got ripped off. But it's like a real movie camera. Look at it, JD insisted. No, man, these were for home movies. Verdad, mi amor. He waited for Ama to agree with him, but she was falling asleep again, her eyes blinking closed. Like I said, your tata had one. Used to record all sorts of unwatchable bullshit with it. It doesn't even record sound. JD's face must have crumbled, because his father added, but if you want to try to fix it, I got some small screwdrivers in the glove compartment of my truck. That should work. Have at it. The screwdrivers weren't in the glove compartment, but there were always loose tools on the seat and floor. So JD fished around underneath the seats. The condoms were tucked inside the brown paper bag that JD's searching fingers had scraped across. He retrieved the bag, and thinking the screwdrivers might be in there, unfurled the worn paper and discovered the box. It had been carelessly ripped open, half left from a dozen. JD sat back with the condoms spilled on his lap, head tingling and body heavy, stunned, like he'd just been in a car accident, one he hadn't seen coming. All right. Thank you guys very much. That's my presentation. think we have time for questions now.
If you raise your hand, I can bring a mic around to you if you have any questions. We want to get all the questions on through a mic because we're recording.
So I was just curious, with the conversations you had with the man on death row, and how he didn't have a father or know his father, how did that impact you as a father yourself, and kind of your relationship with your kids and how it might impact, you know, his life on death row and all that?
So yeah, being a father is super important to me, and like in all my work, the father-son relationship is a pretty primary relationship that I explore and write about and return to all the time. My relationship with my father was kind of contentious, like JD's was, and I've had plenty of friends who were like John who didn't know their dads. My best friend was always at my house because his mom was at work. He didn't know where his dad was, so he was like a third, like a second brother to me, a third sibling that was always at our house. So I'm aware of how important that relationship is, because growing up as a young boy, you know, the men around you are who you're trying to emulate. And if there's not this person sitting there with you every day, there's a piece of you that's always kind of missing. In that chapter I read with Juan, him wanting to see a familiar face in a yearbook is something that, you know, people who have their full family kind of take for granted. They know the two sides and make them up. So when that piece is missing, there's a lot of wondering, like, who am I going to be? What am I? This person who, you know, made me is now gone. Is that a rejection of me? Would I end up doing that to other people? So I know even with my own kids, I make sure that I'm super present. I try to be as encouraging and empathetic as I be. And a lot of that has to do with the way I was raised, and try to make sure that I don't make the same mistakes. And I don't want to slag my father in any way, but you know, that our parents make, and try to do different by them and have different outcomes. It's super quiet in here.
Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
As an artist, sometimes I feel like I'm using my subject matter, whether it's a person I'm drawing or the landscape even, like I'm taking advantage of it for my own good pleasure of creating. And I'm just wondering, when you were researching and getting to know the man on death row, if you struggled with that yourself, like were you just doing that for your own personal gain, or yeah, just wondering how you worked through any emotions with his story for your story in a sense.
So I mean, like in an exploitative way.
Meaning like you got to know him and interact with him for your book, for your own journey. And if that was uncomfortable for you because you were doing it for yourself, or were you able to move past that to
Yeah, I think we had a correspondence long after some of the initial questions had been answered. So I know me writing him that letter out of this kind of like a fury of inspiration was me just being super curious about his life, because to me these are like these intractable problems I just can't stop thinking about. And not that I'm going to solve any of those problems, but I just want to know. So it's curiosity is that what drove me to write John. And John, to his credit, was very open in writing back and wrote back almost immediately. And we had this really kind of nice 1.5 year long kind of pen pal relationship. You know, we would talk about our lives growing up. I would talk to him about what was going on with me at the time. I didn't have any kids yet, but we were just kind of exchanging, you know, experiences. And, you know, it got to the point where we were making jokes, and it was kind of like I don't want to say a friendship, because he abruptly just stopped writing, and I don't quite know why. And those were his personal reasons, but I never felt like I was using John in any way that was malicious. I was very upfront, letting him know that I was a writer, that I was doing research, and this is really kind of the question I was investigating. So he was well aware of what I was doing while I was writing it. So I always felt comfortable with the work I was doing. I didn't feel like I was exploiting it in any way. I was very upfront with John when I started.
So I know you mentioned that while you were writing, your wife popped up some babies. And so
That's true, she did do that.
So I was wondering, like, what types of environments do you like thrive in while you're writing? Like, or were you writing at home at that time, or were you, like some authors, going to social places to get inspiration for your dialogue, things like that?
Oh, that's a good question. So I have the weirdest writing regimen and schedule, and it's always kind of fluctuating. So when I started writing this, I mean, I'm still in the Air Force, but I was working the night shift. I'd get off at about 11:30. And then instead of going home, I would drive to this Denny's that was by the airport where I worked. And I would do long hours drinking, gut-wrecking coffee and eating French fries and cheese sticks and gaining weight and thinking, oh, I gotta stop doing this and find somewhere else to write. But I've never really had like a home office just because the nature of my job is so busy that I just have to find time to write. I write on Scrivener, it's on my phone, so sometimes I'll be writing on my phone. I'll write when I'm waiting in the waiting room for whatever reason. If I'm at a kid's doctor's appointment, I'll be writing. If I'm just at work and I got some time, I have an idea, I'll write it down. Now with the two kids I have, I drive them to folklorico practice where they dance, they go to piano practice, and I'm there and I drive them, and then I sit in my car with a tumbler of coffee, and I bought this little thing that I stick on my steering wheel, and I sit there hunched over and just type in my car. So writing has to be something that you're committed to, and for me, there's no perfect situation to write. I would love the idea of having like this wonderful office where I look outside, I'm just super inspired all the time. I can sit there and write, but that's just not the reality for me. So for me, writing is important enough that I squeeze writing in when I can. And then if I only get to 10 minutes one day, then I don't feel guilty about it. I don't punish myself for not getting the reps in or the words in or the word count that I want. I came, I did the work for the day, this is all I could do. And then I let myself off the hook, which I think is important for young writers to do. I like your shirt, by the way. I always feel that way. There we go.
You mentioned that you also have an anthology out and had short stories published. What was the process of getting the anthology and short stories published?
You mean the collection of my collection of short stories?
Yeah.
It was writing one story at a time and sending them off to journals and getting them published. And then as I started to look at my work, I started to realize that there was a lot of interconnected themes inside the story. So then I went back and revised a lot of the stories. So they're much different than what got published in some of those journals. So I started crafting a larger piece together. So like if you're looking to write a short story collection, you write your short stories, but then if you notice that there's commonality and there's like a larger idea that these stories are all kind of pushing towards and exploring, then don't be afraid to cobble those things together and then weave them together, which is what I did in Twitching Heart. So like Barely Missing Everything, all the stories in Twitching Heart take place in this one neighborhood in El Paso. And all the characters have these really tangential relationships with each other where they don't know about each other, but their lives affect the lives of other people. Just the way societies work. We always think that, we're always the stars of our own movies, and we don't necessarily realize how the things we choose to do, our actions or our situations, affect the people around us. So I wanted to kind of create that butterfly effect in Twitching Heart, where all the characters' lives just in this neighborhood all affect each other. They're all in this common thing together that they're not sure, they don't realize that they're in. That's kind of what I was exploring there. Any other questions? What?
All right, so this question is similar to like music artists and how music artists have like unreleased music. So would you have like unreleased stories? And if you do have those unreleased stories, is it because like it's missing that one big moment that you still haven't found like that inspiration? And the second question is like, it goes with that. So what's next for you?
So yes, I do have pieces that I've been working on, some like really smart, small pieces of flash fiction that I have that would seem done, but when I read them, they don't feel true. there's something missing in there. I've gotten all the cliches out, so I'm done lying. But there's something else in the story that's not quite right. When I read it, I'm not thinking, yeah, this is fine. Somebody would probably publish this, but it doesn't feel like I want to let go of it yet. It doesn't feel absolutely true yet. I'm like, sort of true. It's a half-true story. So I have them sitting there and I don't know when I'm going to have the chance to go back to them. Like, I really love writing short stories. Writing novels to me is really fun. Short stories is like some terrible thing I'm addicted to doing, because to me, writing a short story is super torturous. They're like these really precise little watches that all the little gears have to work, and you gotta sit there and tinker with them. And if one little gear is misaligned, then the whole thing doesn't work and it's just wrong, which is where I'm at with some of those stories. Where a novel, you have room to explore and play around and use a bunch of swears. So I enjoy writing novels more than I like writing short stories, but I always return to short stories for some reason, just to torture myself. So eventually, I want to have a collection of flash fiction that I want to put out, but I don't know when. It's not a high priority for me. They're just sitting there, and I want to make sure I talk about being kind to yourself as a writer. I want to make sure I give those stories room to breathe, and I'm not trying to rush anything out just because I have the urge to publish. I'd rather them sit on them and then have stories I can look back and like, those are gonna endure because I endured writing them and took the time to do it right.
So when you're working on stories and your flash fiction and your novels, how do you go about like getting advice? Do you ask other people to read it and ask for their suggestions? Do you just go through it over and over again on your own? How do you go through that process? Maybe before you go to an editor, do you go to like friends or anything like that?
I'm really secretive with what I'm writing, which is probably a bad thing for a writer. Like, I love writing groups and will participate in them and read other people's work and try to be generous with feedback. With my own stuff though, I really don't let anybody read them, which is probably a shortcoming in a person. I should probably talk to my therapist about it, but I don't do it. So like with the novel, the only person that read the novel, who read Barely Missing Everything before it came out, was my agent. So she read it and then sent it out. So then my editor was the second person to read it. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And I don't really know why that is. I'm not like afraid of having people read it. For me, it's just, I don't know. I feel like I'm cooking in the kitchen and I just want to control all the ingredients. And if it comes out great, then yay. And if not, I'm the only one that has to eat it.
How did you come up with the title of the novel?
Barely Missing Everything? My editor came up with the title. It's a kind of a funny story. So in the draft form, it had a different title that was kind of close to a book I had never knew existed, but that had drawn up some controversy. So all the way through almost a copy of this, we had the original title of the book, which I won't say because I don't know what the other book is. And I don't want to do that to that writer. But we were getting ready to go very much to the end until an intern had said, hey, this title is very similar to this title. Do we want to have this as the title? So then everybody at the publishing house, my editor, were like, oh, we got to pick a different title. We got to do it very quickly. So she said, send me 10 title names and we'll see what sticks. And of course, I just did it really fast. They were all like, I don't know, the novel. They were all bad titles. And then she was the one that found the phrase "barely missing everything" because it's how one of the chapters ends. A very important chapter ends that way. And she said, I think this kind of captures everything in the novel. And of course, like with everything, she was absolutely right. And I'm super thankful for her, both for her editing and her wisdom, and then for picking the title for me. So now she's gonna have to pick all the titles. They send the untitled documents now. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Matt, if you want to head out after you've settled to go sign books, we have two of his novel and a short story collection that he is part of for sale. If you don't already have a copy, and please also stay around to grab coffee and cake, right? Cookies, sorry. Thank you again.